I guess you can tell that today is a little bit off, or I'm off or something, because I didn't have this on when I came up here. So I'm standing up here putting it on. I thought I had everything under control. I am a little bit off today. I was sitting down, and it was tithe and offering time, and I realized I didn't have anything up on my phone. I didn't have my illustration up. I didn't have my Bible up. And I didn't want to get up here and start searching for all of that kind of stuff. I was relaxed or distracted or something. But the text for today, can anybody guess by the title? This is your reasonable service. Romans 12:1. This is from the New Living Translation. So, dear brothers and sisters, I plead with you to give your bodies to God because of all he has done for you. Let them be a living and holy sacrifice, the kind he will find acceptable. This is truly the way to worship him. And for the more familiar version, the King James Version, I grew up with the King James Version. It's much more familiar to me. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. When you think of sacrifice, is it something enjoyable? Is it something that you want to do? And yet, Paul says, present your bodies as a sacrifice. Not just any sacrifice, but a living sacrifice. What would be easier? Okay, what would be easier? To present your bodies as a lamb, that was slaughtered on the altar, to present a sacrifice that way, or to present yourself as a living sacrifice? What do you think would be easier? I think it would be the first. You die once and you're finished. Your sacrifice is finished. But Paul says it's a living sacrifice. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. Maybe that's why we're trying to point people as Christians, as the church, we're trying to point people toward living a Christ-centered life. The Jews, they came back from the captivity in Babylon, and they made all these rules because they wanted to point people to right living. They knew something about the sacrificial system. They'd forgotten a lot of it, but they knew something. So make it a sacrifice. Be a living sacrifice. Live your life as sacrificially as possible. So here's a rule. You keep this. You don't walk any more than half a mile on the Sabbath. You don't eat this. You don't eat that. You had to wash your hands before you eat. You had to wash your hands before you do anything. And if you go into a house, you got to wash somebody's feet. And all these rules to live a holy life. And then the rules become your life, and you lose track of what they mean. Paul says, you're actually supposed to live sacrificially. You're not supposed to
memorize the rules and complete the rules. Rich young ruler came to Jesus and says, "What must I do to be saved?" Jesus says, "Well, keep the 10 Commandments." He says, "I've done that from my youth, but what's the point? What else do I have to do?" "Well, give up all you have and follow me." Give up yourself. Give up what is important to you. Give up what makes you happy. Give up what gives you satisfaction in life. Give up the things that you've worked so hard to do. Give up your position in life and follow me. Be a living sacrifice. Can you think of somebody who lived a sacrificial life, i.e. in the Bible? Jesus. Jesus lived a sacrificial life. He didn't live for himself. He lived for other people. In fact, Ellen White says he often would give up his meal for somebody else. He would be preaching long hours, healing many people, and he would stay up extra long to connect with God. He would get up early in the morning to connect with God. He would stay up he would stay up all night to connect with God. You said you had almost a 24-hour day. How enjoyable was that? I mean, sleep-wise, were you able to function properly? Or were you really glad to get some sleep? Yeah, it gets hard. And you weren't really sacrificing. You were coming back from a really great vacation. But can you imagine teaching, talking? I mean, Jesus, in that era of life, you walked wherever you went, and then Jesus was standing and talking for hours and hours, healing, and then he said, when he fed the 5,000, he said to the disciples, "Go over to the other side of the lake. I'm going to stay here and I'm going to pray." And in the third watch of the night, Jesus comes out to the boat on the water. He was praying all through the night. He was sacrificing his personal comfort to spend time with God. Be a living sacrifice. There's a missionary who kind of epitomizes a living sacrifice. He was early 20th century, 19th century missionary. Probably know him, David Livingstone. He went to Africa, and he was sacrificing his life. Back when he went over, you didn't go over and visit every once in a while. You didn't even hardly get letters out. It was like 6-month boat trip across the ocean. No planes, just boats and trains. And so when he decided to become a missionary to Africa, that's where he was. He didn't live in a house, he lived in a hut. But oftentimes, he would be in prayer. People would see him in prayer. People would notice at the end of a long day, he'd spend several hours on his knees in prayer. And one of the last time people saw him, They saw him on his knees by his bed praying. They left him there for a while, but then soon found out that's where he had died. He died in prayer. He says, he puts making a sacrifice into perspective. He says, I never made a sacrifice. I never made a sacrifice. If you live sacrificially, you don't make a sacrifice, you are the sacrifice. You are the sacrifice. Let's see, the Greek word for sacrifice, letuo, that's the root word. Laterio is the root word. And guess what it means? It means service. Laterio means service. So as you're sacrificing, as you're worshiping, as you're sacrificing, you sacrifice to show God what he means to you, right? You sacrifice because you love God. You sacrifice in response to what God has done for you. You live sacrificially. We are to be the sacrifice. God is not asking for believers. In Romans, it doesn't say to give something as a sacrifice. It says, therefore I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies as a living, holy sacrifice, acceptable to God. Present your bodies. Don't give something. Don't dedicate. Christians today think, well, maybe if I just write a check or spend some time at the church. God is not asking the believers to dedicate a gift of theirs or an ability or some of the money that they've made or maybe their time, their ideas or creativity. Those are all good things. And yes, we do offer those. But that's not the sacrifice God's looking for. God's looking for us to be all in, to be the sacrifice, not to make the sacrifice. Making a sacrifice, that's what Livingston was referring to. I did never make a sacrifice. He was the sacrifice. He lived his sacrificial life. God is asking believers to sacrifice self. We often have the idea that we can dedicate our gifts to God. However, where did those gifts come from? Our gifts being ideas, gifts, abilities, money, time, creativity. Our gifts came from God. God has, when we pay tithe, why do we pay tithe? We pay tithe to acknowledge that that is from God. Our money is from God. It's not, God says, if I was hungry, would I ask you? The cattle on 1,000 hills are mine. What we have isn't really ours. Christians often have the idea that we can dedicate our gifts to God. However, we cannot dedicate what we do not own. There is actually only one thing that we can dedicate to God, and that is our right to ourselves. God has given us ourselves. He's given us our right, and we can give it back to God. Dedicate our right to ourselves. This is from Oswald Chambers' Utmost for his highest. He will make a holy experiment out of you, and his experiments always succeed. Be the sacrifice rather than make the sacrifice. Another one is Theodore of Heraclea. He's a Christian martyr from Pontus who died around 306 AD. He says, I know not your gods, talking about the heathen gods. Jesus Christ, the only Son of God, is my God. You can beat me, tear me, burn me, and if my words offend you, cut out my tongue. Every part of my body is ready when God calls for it as a sacrifice. Should be our focus as well today. Christ, when he came to earth, in Philippians, it says, Philippians 2, let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but became obedient as a servant, and he died on the cross. God was a living sacrifice. He was his life. He was the sacrifice. That's our example. Being in the form of God, he thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but he made himself of no reputation, took upon himself the form of a servant, made in the likeness of men, and being found as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death. Not just any death, but death on the cross. And today, we are celebrating his sacrifice with the communion service. So as we celebrate, let us separate and do the foot washing, and we'll come back and the Last Supper.